And welcome, everybody. Welcome to the Winning Momentum podcast with your host. That's me, Scott Sinclair. I have a very special guest for us today. I could turn that music off. Robert Jordan from InterimExecs in Chicago. Are you in Chicago right now?
I am. Sweet home Chicago.
All right. And we are recording this the day after midterm elections in the U.S. So I know that I didn't sleep all night, but I hope that you've gotten through that, Bob. And
God, I'm going to tell you, I slept just fine.
All right, there you go. So Robert leads InterimExecs, providing access between the best interim and project executives in the world, between them and company owners seeking brilliant leadership on demand. Is that like a consulting firm with interim executives, or is it a placement of interim executives? How does that work?
You know, the further I go with this, I feel more like a Hollywood agent. And right. Mike Ovitz, I think Mike Ovitz is a role model. He was the founder of Creative Artist Agency, and when there was a book written about CAA, and boy, I was taking notes. I was just thinking, there are really parallels here. You know, if you've got this rock star executive that has just done incredible things in their career, boy, that's a sacred trust. And Ovitz and the team, the Brad Pitts of the world, they're just showering them with love and affection. I thought that's what you need to do with these executives. So in a way, our business, what I think is interesting how it's evolved is that clients show up, their organizations, public companies, private companies, nonprofits, and you might think, well, that's your customer. They pay you. And in a way, yes, of course, they pay us. But more than that, I think, no, we better do right by these executives. If we don't, there's nothing here.
Exactly. Now, through the course of this experience of dealing with these executives that are rock stars, you've had an opportunity in your career to discuss what success is with hundreds and hundreds of successful executives. And so you've learned about leadership, management, entrepreneurialism, all of those things, correct?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. And that's why we're having you on the show here, is because there's a lot to learn from you. Robert has launched, grown, and sold a number of fast growing companies. His first company was Online Access, which put him on the Inc. 500 list of fastest growing companies. And after he sold that, that's when he launched InterimExecs. And somewhere in here, it tells me that was an excellent exit for you, this Online Access. Was that your first entrepreneurial venture?
Yeah, I dropped out of, I was in business school at Northwestern University and rated #1 B school in the US at the time. And I dropped out to launch Online Access. And in the early days of raising money, it was not going well. And I thought, I dropped out of the best business school to go do this. And at the time, the whole concept of entrepreneurship was not exactly glamorous. And my fellow students just thought I was crazy.
Yeah, it's not like it is today, right?
No, yeah.
Yeah, entrepreneurial, that's one of the reasons for this show. I'm going to get into that with some stats for you in a minute here. But one of the reasons for this show is my fear of particularly the younger generation abandoning education and traditional careers in favor of entrepreneurialism because they're motivated to do so by social media and coaches and social trends, but they have no idea what they're getting into. And not everybody's meant to be in that position.
Yeah.
Well,
I think even if you eventually are wired to do it, there's huge learnings from other companies, and it's not a black and white divide like it used to be. It used to be that major corporations, many of them were fairly clueless on the traits of nimbleness and agility that, is like the biggest advantage that startups have. These days, there are many larger organizations that they get it, and they know, the whole concept of agile, as a programming methodology comes from the fact that it used to be these monolithic software companies like Microsoft. They did what was called waterfall, massive developments, thousands of people, years, millions of dollars, launch the product, and it fails. And, the lesson from more nimble companies was, it's almost a meaningless mantra now, fail fast.
Don't you think this is still happening, though? If you look this week at all the tech news and the layoffs at Twitter, Meta, who else? Everybody is going through mass layoffs and a bunch of failures happening. Don't you think it's the same?
Well, we could unpack this a bit. I have my own particular view here, which is that Silicon Valley is a hypersensitive, hyper-reactive thing. The best of the innovativeness and the newness of disruptive technologies that come out of Silicon Valley is, in great times, it's euphoric. And so the money raising that tends to go on is enormous, both for the venture funds and for those companies. By the standards of anywhere else in the world, it looks ridiculous. The flip side of it is that in a downturn, the sentiment at the moment, from what I'm hearing in Silicon Valley is, oh my God, this is terrible. And more catastrophic than perhaps it will be. And I think it's the flip side. If you look at the actual metrics of a lot of the big tech businesses, Google, Meta, they're not that far off from prior quarters revenue or cash flow, but because they have Wall Street on the brain now, and they think they ought to react the way, say, a manufacturing business does, when it really has a downturn, I think there's some overreaction going on there.
Well, okay. I mean, it's I'm actually going to dive deeper into this Twitter thing on future shows. I do about some shows on my own and some shows with guests. My audience will know that. But I love turnarounds. That's what I do for a living, which are the exact same thing as high growth from a leadership management perspective, because you're dealing with chaos over order, and by definition.
I love your take on this, Scott. Twitter is its own beast because it's not classic turnaround in the sense that it was about to go under. It's turnaround in the sense that Elon Musk came in with an entirely new playbook. And to my way of thinking...
But they never made money.
They never made money, but they weren't at risk of going under. And in our book, I know we're going to talk a little about right leader, right time. These four leadership styles, the fixer leadership style that you exemplify. We don't know other fixers who would go in the way Elon is going in, but it's different because it's his money and he owns it. So he's only answering to himself. He's not answering to a board or any other stakeholders.
Agreed. Or he's answering to banks for sure, because that's a lot of debt. But I would argue, first of all, I think our debate here is really just definitional. There's a turnaround. There's a continuum of turnarounds in my experience, and one is you're about to go under, or you have gone under. You've sought protection, and you're restructuring, and so that's sort of one end of it. And the other end, would be you're just not performing as well as you ought to be, right? And the reason that's relevant, I've talked about it on this show before, is that it takes an entirely different leader, those two ends of that continuum. So, for example, I'm really good when the shit has hit the fan. That's my particular strength. I may not be as subtle as required at the other end of operational improvements, or as inspiring, perhaps, even if I could point fingers at myself on that front. I would suggest to you that Twitter is somewhere on that continuum. Like, they're not going under, but they never made money. They had no prospects of making money. And the only thing that kept them afloat was the endless availability of capital that you talked about at the beginning of this part of the conversation.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. Robert was managing partner of Red Flash for 25 years, relevance being that the companies this helped other companies raise capital and launch products. Red Flash inject veteran leadership to address the toughest issues, prioritize, and deliver great results. So, Robert, you've had a bunch of experience in capital raising and understanding the relationship between management quality, leadership quality, and raising capital. Is that correct?
Oh yeah. And I'm glad you're getting into this because Scott, for me, you're like a Jack London-esque figure, which is to say you've had your own leadership experience. From what I've read and know about you, is you're on an adventure. You're on a grand adventure. Would that be accurate?
I feel like it's a sketchy adventure this year, but sure. We knocked it out of the park at the beginning of COVID. Completely transformed all of the businesses, which, by the way, was not great planning. That was just, we happened to be in the right space at the right time. I don't want to take credit for that necessarily. But supply chain.
Sorry for interrupting you, but actually, this is where I would give you more credit because one of the things, we in the position that I'm in, where we're this matchmaker, we've had 7,000 executives show up on our proverbial doorstep. If that was a line outside your studio there, Scott, that would be about 4 miles long. And the patterns, the vast majority of those executives were, to our way of observing, they were having career experiences and leadership journeys that were okay, but not great. And if you just looked at the top, say, 5%, radically different experience, leaders producing exceptional results. But among all of those executives, either, if you asked them about the earlier part of their careers, most of them would have been kind of like, whatever. It's just that for the exceptional people, whether they would say it was intentional or not, there's this path that could be discerned over time. And that even if there were only subtle cues and clues along the way, they just tended to gravitate more and more towards their strength, intuitively making better decisions, intuitively putting themselves in the way of better outcomes. Not always, but so I give you more intentionality than you might, or maybe you're just being humble.
Not usually, but thank you for that. Bob is the author of How They Did It, $1 Billion Insights from the Heart of America. Real world advice. How They Did It is a book of inspirations, ideas, and advice from 45 of the most successful founders ever to come out of the heart of America. Compelling stories in this book. You spent 4 years assembling and interviewing a very private, in some cases reclusive group of champions. All of them had sold their businesses for a minimum of $100 million valuation. And you elicited from these people practical advice and encouragement straight from the founders themselves. And that book is a few years old now, is that correct?
Yes, that book came out in 2010. It was the result. I had a blessed event. I was part of an IPO, initial public offering. And even when you're just a small shareholder, boy, if you ask my wife, she'll tell you that made up for a multitude of prior sins. And I just had this feeling of, how do I give back? And considered various things, assembling a lot of wealthy investors into a charity, into a venture fund. And because I had, some roots in publishing, I thought, well, there is this bias in the world that the only place innovation really occurs is Silicon Valley. And frankly, I got a little chip on my shoulder that I don't like that. And so sought out to prove through these stories that incredible things were going on in the heartland of the U.S.
They definitely are. I've spent quite a bit of time there. I agree with you completely. You have a new book out, Right Leader, Right Time. Tell us about that. When was it released, and what are we talking about in that book?
The print version of Right Leader, Right Time came out about 6 months ago. The Audible version, which has about 4 hours of bonus material, came out a month ago. And the starting point for that was one really bad thing and one good thing. The bad thing is what I was alluding to before, which is here we had met these thousands of executives, and it was a little painful over time to see how many of them they weren't crushing it. They were not. And I just had this thought, which is, boy, if you could get a message out to people early in their careers, and maybe we belabored it because we came out with a book, but I'll tell you what it is. Don't try to be all things to all people. Now, if you said that to most leaders—
focus, you mean, or
yes,
focus on your strengths? Yeah. Okay.
That over time, exceptional leaders tend to exhibit a particular leadership style, and they will tend to double down. And we're fans of a phrase we used in the book called highest and best use. And what you tend to see among exceptional people is they tend to reject more of what is not for their highest and best use. It's really easy to say. It is incredibly hard, maybe at points impossible for someone earlier in the leadership journey, because they need the job and they need the money. And I get that. But it is absolutely something to notice over time.
How do you balance that focus, that doubling down, trying to be singular on an approach to decision-making and leadership with the idea of needing to say yes a lot?
It's a great question, maybe the key question. One thing we say to folks when they hear these 4 leadership styles is we're not trying to pigeonhole anyone into just one. But the most important thing is you're the one choosing the path. It makes perfect sense only with hindsight. The further a person has gone in their career, the more logic that stacks up as they are successful, why this move led to that move in a journey. So it is something where the challenge doesn't go away. And that ability to be distracted, to make decisions that are not necessarily great, it's what we all face every day. I'd say it's even harder now because in an age of phones and social media, distraction is epidemic. And for prior generations that did not hold a phone in their hands 24 hours a day, it frankly was just easier. Okay.
If you check out Bob's LinkedIn profile, you're going to see hundreds, maybe that's an exaggeration, but a lot of recommendations and kudos from people that have worked with Bob. For example, Bob is a bright, personable, pragmatic, driven, and capable professional, steady hand and patience. Helped me with a successful exit for one of our portfolio companies. I've enjoyed his friendship and tremendous counsel. Comes with the highest recommendations. But Bob, there's one here that I thought maybe you wrote yourself. You can confirm.
Before you ask the question, I'm going to tell you, don't ever believe your own propaganda. But please go on.
Yeah, you don't read your own press releases, which is why I think I'm wondering if you wrote this one yourself. I loved it. Bob Jordan is part entrepreneur and part visionary, and while many have dreams, Bob is among the few who have courage, determination, skill to make dreams a reality. Bob Jordan lives in both worlds. He's a person who can observe complex situations, break them down, and identify key issues, like the Dalai Lama.
Someone said that in a recommendation?
Yes. He can cut to the core and inspire with just a few insightful words. Merely being with Bob can make you a better person. So this is the quality of people I'm bringing on the show here, folks.
Yeah, there you go. There you go. Are you making that up, or was that really in
I'm not making that up. I picked it up from LinkedIn, and I thought,
oh my
for
God.
a guy from Chicago, that's just going to drive him nuts. That's
I'm cringing for your listeners who aren't viewing. This is cringe.
I thought it was awesome. I thought it was awesome. Let's dive into some.
I think it was my mother. Maybe it was my mother.
Exactly. let's dive into some help for people here. Partnerships and scalability is the first thing I wanted to talk about. I mentioned this podcast is called the Winning Momentum Podcast. And the reason that I started this in its predecessor show called Martinis with Scott, where I sat around, drank martinis in front of a microphone and talked about things, which we have to do someday, Bob.
Well, if I can remind you, the first time you and I talked, I believe you were in that posture.
Oh, was I?
Yes.
that may have
You
been
were at
true.
an airport. I think you were at an airport. We had a little audio-visual. I was very impressed. Scott, I got to say.
There you go. I started this show because when we talk about this entrepreneurial culture that exists in the U.S., where you are, there are 600,000, yes, new businesses launched a month, every single month. Okay. And of those new businesses, 90% of them will never, ever, ever, ever pay their founder a living wage. 98% of them will never create intergenerational wealth. So maybe, some of them you can eat, you can pay your rent, but you're not ever creating that independence that all entrepreneurs are seeking and creating wealth. 2% of them do. And so the whole concept of this show is maybe we can change some of those statistics and help a bunch more people than I do one-on-one and than what I suspect you do one-on-one. I suspect that's why, as you said before, you write books and you have blog posts that we'll reference at the end of the show here for people. So those are the stats that really drive me to create this content. And you asked a question, I think, on one of your blog posts. Why is the average income of an entrepreneur in the US so low? For 90% of them, perhaps zero. Because most solo businesses owners are just solo. They seemingly can't get out of the solo box. And it brings up this whole topic of partnerships and scalability. And I want to give you two examples of that because I think we have a different take on the surface of that, but probably not in reality. Okay. And so that's where I'm heading with this. One is listeners to the show will be very familiar. He's been on a couple of times with a fellow by the name of Rob Fraser, who is an entrepreneur out of Victoria, Canada, who was a cyclist on Team Canada and really a tremendous athlete, which is where I met him originally. And then after his pro cycling career, went on to become an entrepreneur where he launched a athletic sock company and has been through many of the trials and tribulations of being an entrepreneur, including having a partner early on that didn't work out, and has come through that and is now just knocking it out of the park. He's doing tremendous. I'm so happy for him. And he's a great guy. And he shares his journey on social media very well. And he's happy to jump on the podcast and often does me favors for that. Point being, my audience will be familiar with that name. And Rob would tell you, very earnestly and openly, and has on our podcast, talked about his partnership issues, which is that he was young, he had no confidence, he didn't know what he was doing, and he brought in a partner. And the partner was a relative of the guy who wrote them the check, I believe, as I recall the story properly. And it didn't work out within the first year, and they were out of money, and there was argument, and there was no shareholders agreement. And he had to get out of that situation, which was very difficult and expensive for him. And a second example would be somebody who is much more private and was in the insurance business, but I won't tell anybody more than that. But he started off with a brokerage with a partnership that was based on, two guys hanging out, drinking beers that were in the industry and decided to start a business together. And same story. It was a disaster. The partner was a disaster. Took him about a year to realize this and to find a way out of this situation at great expense with lawyers. And now he's retired, rich, and wealthy, and all those sorts of things. But I was advising him before he even launched his business. And what do you need this partner for? And I would have told Rob the same thing, because my belief is that many entrepreneurs start a partnership at the beginning because of lack of confidence, because they want to share the excitement and the journey and the risk and the fear together. Not because there's a strategic or executional fit between those two individuals. And neither of these people had shareholders agreement. And so your content talks a lot about the need to scale, which I also agree with. And I feel like I err too far to the doing everything myself side. And although I'm working hard to get over that, what are your thoughts on this whole thing? Because I've proposed an opposing, perhaps, view to what you've been writing about.
Well, I think it's good to mix it up. For people who are going to be solo practitioners or almost freelance, to have a partner is in many cases going to be painful and not work, because they have a vision that has to get into the world, and that's not necessarily what leads to larger organizations. I think that for any business, anything that does scale, it is based on, if not necessarily partnership in the sense of two people who started it or grew it together, that there has to be over time an understanding about how a team comes to perform really, really well together for that to occur. One of the key things we noticed about exceptional leaders, that we wrote about in the current book, is that while the first ability of exceptional leaders is doubling down, equally important is this ability to collaborate on steroids. It's another quality that's very easy to say. All leaders say, I'm a great collaborator, but actually the majority are not. They're not. Because if you have this attitude that you have to be all things to all people, or that you're insecure enough, which is that you have to try to do more because you cannot focus, well, what goes with that is you could never admit someone else was better than you at a task on the team. It makes it harder to collaborate. So it is...
You could never even admit that someone's 80% as good as you, and that's enough.
Exactly. So getting partnership right, totally agreed. It's incredibly hard. At the same point, when we were back writing how they did it, I felt a little guilty of the fact that it's like, I'm putting up all these hood ornaments. All these incredible people, like, we interviewed Joe Mansueto, the founder of Morningstar, and we're making them look great. He would readily say, he had so many incredible people around him. There are these examples of where it does work. Bill Gates, who did he have? He had Steve Ballmer, and before that, he had Paul Allen. I mean, he was a pipsqueak kid, and he looked up to Paul Allen. And Steve Jobs, he had Woz. And so Jobs could be the crazy man, and Woz actually built the computer.
Did the execution, that's right.
Even Elon Musk, Scott, even Elon Musk, where you think this is the most iconoclastic human being on the planet at the moment, why is it SpaceX tends to stay out of the news more than Tesla and for sure Twitter? Well, he's got a partner. Her name is Gwynne Shotwell. She rose through the ranks. She's now the named president. She's the only person that can approve a launch other than Elon. And so because he has this effective partnership, it takes all of the pressure off. You can even go back, Walt Disney gets all the credit. What about his brother, Roy? Roy was the one that supported Walt.
Right. And does this come back to your idea? I think it does, of focusing on who you are and what you are for success, and finding a management team, partner or otherwise, but key executives around you that do what they do best, and you put it together as a team, right? It doesn't have to be a partnership. I think the conversation is broader than that. But I mean, the one thing that I find amazing about Elon is it seems to me he does know real, like he doesn't get involved in finance or I don't know what other functions, but he seems to do what he does and hires great people to do the rest. And I think Jobs was the same, although I'm not as much an expert on him, but it seems to me he was the same.
Yeah, he was deposed in a lawsuit about 18 months, 2 years ago. And he said during the deposition, he just really wants to do engineering and product design. And it was almost a default that he's in the CEO role because he wants to be in control of his destiny, which I get. But he's not turned on by most of the functions that exist in a lot of these leadership roles.
Yeah. Very, very interesting. And so you listed out some qualities that you would look for in a partner or a right-hand person, so to speak, if I'm trying to remove this from the partnership in sense of like shared ownership, partnership. And what you listed out as qualities, maybe you can touch on quickly, but they were leadership, integrity, strategy, action, and results.
Yeah, the older I get, the issue of integrity is the one that keeps on coming back. I don't know if I'm like other people. I make the assumption in a lot of ventures, investing in things, helping other teams, that kind of everyone has some common ground, some standard of honor your own word. And I'm not sure that's always true. And so I'm going to stay optimistic and hold to it, but it's absolutely kind of a watchword with us and my partners, which is, integrity is all. And especially in this working with executives around the world.
How do you define integrity for that purpose?
It is a sense of, it is wholeness. It is being true to your word. To give you a small way.
To your individual word or to a collective set of values?
It is first, Shakespeare got it right, to thine own self be true. There has to be within you a sense of that you're holding accountable to yourself. If you're religious, there's a higher power that is there, but it is first and foremost that you hold yourself to account. It's not that any outsider is going to be the master of you. It is that first you honor your word. And small examples are big. The small example, Scott, you and I, we set a time to get on this call. And so it's a little promise, and both you and I were on time. So we honor our word, and it's a little way in which we learn I can trust you and you can trust me. That's it. It can sound like a silly example, but
it's actually it's a dead on example, Bob, because I woke up this morning and I looked at my calendar and I saw we had this, and I have my father-in-law and my mother are both in hospital as we speak. This week, my wife is gone for a month trying to look after her father. And so I'm a single dad. I got a dog. I got 8 million things going on, and I hadn't prepared for this. And I looked at my calendar. I thought, I'd really rather do this some other day. And that was what went through my head. And it took me 30 seconds, but I was like, no, accountability, get your act together and do the right thing and don't jerk this guy around. It's a perfect example.
First of all, I hope your father-in-law and your mother have very fast recoveries.
Thank you.
And just so everybody understands, the flip side, we're all out of integrity at various points. Had I been running late in traffic, I would have been late. Okay, and there is a solution there, which is to apologize. I don't care how advanced anybody is, to simply acknowledge 100%. If you are out of integrity, is to tell the person you made the promise to, I'm sorry, and make a new commitment. Which is, I'm really sorry, screwed it up. Doesn't need any excuses. Doesn't matter it's traffic or whatever. I'm sorry about that. Could we reschedule? I promise you, I'm going to be on time the next time. That's all that it is. Okay, it's not a superhuman thing, but this is the ways in which we all build trust with each other. And if we can't do it this way,
Exactly.
then when it comes to the big things, like if you're on a team with somebody and you count on them that we're going to make a presentation tomorrow with our biggest client, and I got my component ready, and you're going to deliver, you're going to have your component, and this is how we're a team together. You have to deliver. If you want to be trusted, you just have to deliver.
That's right. That's right. And in your conversations, Bob, with the rock stars, the people that you coach, the people you associate with and manage, do you have conversations not specifically about accountability, which I think is what we just talked about, and integrity related to that, but values and how and organizational values, not personal values, and how they drive culture and give you something to be accountable to? Have you had those conversations, and have you written about that?
Well, you are asking such a juicy question. This is so front and center for me because
I've done this before, Bob.
Yes, you've had experience at it. As I'm getting to know executives, for example, I tend to be a storyteller. That could be bad or good. Could be I'm talking too much, but I will tell stories, and generally there are going to be some disasters in there of not accidental screw ups, not that, but no, intentional bad wrongdoing. Because I want to know who I'm getting in the trenches with and how they feel about that and how it will play. And so I'm going to give you an example because, the day job, run this company, InterimExecs, right? It's a matchmaker, rainmaker around the world. And our success is because we created this concept called Red Team. Red stands for Rapid Executive Deployment. So hundreds of executives are on it. Thousands want to get on it. And over the years, there's a set of rules which has developed around the team because we've observed all this greatness. We've placed these people. We talk to the clients, the boards, the owners. We know what's going on. One of the rules is called generosity up front. Now, I'll describe what generosity up front is, but the reason I'm bringing it up is
adding value first.
You have to add value first before you're ever paid, before there's ever a contract. If you cannot prove to us and to this client organization who you are before you walk in the door, we don't want to be with you. We want that generosity because, frankly, everybody sounds smart. Everybody at this level is strategic. But the dividing line is not everybody can execute well. And so there must be generosity up front. And these are the kind of rules we want to talk about before we're in the heat of battle to see how are you wired? How do you feel about that? How has it been for you in your career?
Interesting. I relate that to, I tell a story on this channel. It's a story that I stole from somebody else on Clubhouse. I have no idea who, otherwise I would give them credit, but it was a psychologist. And it was about just how humans value certain traits. And it starts with, if you could imagine yourself in a business, in an organization, and there's an important presentation coming up to senior management, and you trust your coworker is supposed to do some of this work, and you get to the important day, and you just believe that they're going to have this right. That it comes up and they put up the PowerPoint presentation, and there's typos and adding mistakes, and the whole thing doesn't make any sense, and they're clearly incompetent. Now, if you could imagine that situation, how do you feel about that coworker? And the answer is you perhaps are frustrated. Perhaps you think they're not competent, but it kind of just stops there. And that is the emotional response to that situation. Now, if you have the exact same story and you say to that colleague, have you got this right? And that colleague tells you, yes, we've been working on it for a week and we've had it, edited and reviewed by third parties, and they've done all the ads and everything's perfect on this thing. And then they put it up with all these typos and adding mistakes. Well, they lied to you. And now how do you feel about that person? Well, you hate that person because you value trust more than competence. Okay. And then the third leg of this is if you're in an organization and your best friend says to you within that organization says, "Hey, I need you to come help me and do some stuff and errands," and you go out in the car for a work thing, and he sidetracks you to a bar, and it's a surprise party for you. Okay, how do you feel about that? Well, you feel great because we value benevolence more than trust. Benevolence is greater than trust, is greater than competence. Competence is, the step in the door. And this relates to pitching businesses. If you're pitching competence, hey, we're the greatest at this, that, and the other thing, you're just doing it wrong. What you need to be pitching is benevolence, how you care and add value first to your counterparty, which I think is a story relevant to what you were saying.
I love your description. I think that's perfect. Yeah.
So just back to values and organizational values. To me, it's the values that change the culture. When I walk into a troubled company, I try to come up with a cohesive set of 3 values or 4 values that this is what we're about. And typically I create those values based on the opposite of what's been happening to drive that company, into the trouble that it's in. And so, for example, right now I own a business that I bought out of bankruptcy, and our values are teamwork, number 1, which is a reaction to the prior owners of that business who drove it into bankruptcy that were very much hiding and separating people and creating boxes so that nobody knew what was going on. And number 2 is openness, which, is defined as integrity and honesty. And we're just going to tell the truth to each other and to third parties, which again was a reaction. Perfect deliveries and perfect qualities, with the caveat that we don't expect to be perfect ever on anything. How could you? But if you don't aim for that, if you don't make decisions with that in mind, you're not going to improve, right? You always need to set lofty standards. And if you can instill those values that this is what we're about, now you have a framework for making decisions.
Yes, totally right. We're part of what resonates for me is I had the first book experience I had was with a partner of mine who was a negotiations coach named Jim Camp, and we published a book called Start With No, and it's been out for many years, a bestseller, translated into a lot of languages. And Jim, really the biggest thing that he would get on about is does the organization have a mission and purpose? And it would drive down to the individual. It would drive down to the individual negotiation. And for a lot of organizations, I think they've lost their way when they go into crisis. Part of what goes with it is they've lost their way, and they don't really have a valid mission and purpose at that point.
Exactly right. And which is going to lead me to something I always encourage the listeners to this show to send in questions, topics they'd like me to comment on. And they do. They rarely do it in the comment section on YouTube, but they send me private emails or text messages or what have you. And one person, a few weeks ago, I've been doing shorts, Bob, on TikTok and YouTube, and just 60 seconds on something. And
look at you, TikTok and everything,
right? I don't dance when I do it, but somebody had sent me a question: how do you do all these things if you lack self-discipline? To which I'm not expecting you to answer that one, by the way, but what I said was, nobody lacks self-discipline. What they lack and what you lack is a purpose, sufficient in value to get you up in the morning and stay focused on executing on what you want to execute on. Okay, that's my view of that situation. To which I got an email from somebody else thanking me for that and asking some other questions related to values. And I thought maybe I'd give you an opportunity to talk about that, because you do have a view and a methodology to help younger professionals, correct, in building their career, which is exactly what this person is. And I won't drop any names, as I never do with her, but she has said, anyways, I'd just love to get your take on this for her, that self-discipline has never been an issue in her life. Though lately, she's wondered a lot about purpose. And is the purpose more evident when you have a family to support, or you're in a great career and on route to a more spectacular life? And I won't read this whole thing, but the bottom line is she's been trying to find a job that excites her. She's a professional, by the way. I won't tell you what time, but she's a professional that is not in public practice, has moved on to working within businesses. And what she's struggling with is this idea of she's embraced values, but they're her values. And she's out trying to find a company that jives with her values. And I don't know that works. That's kind of the heart of what I want you to talk about is I think you need the organization has to have its values, and you need to decide whether you fit within those or not, whether you can embrace those. And that's basically our question. Is that is purpose easy to grasp? How do you find this purpose? And how do you juggle this value issue? Because what I think is going to happen is she's going to go around the rest of her life and not find the organization has the perfect value set for her.
Well, you're hitting on the core here, and I'm reminded as you're talking about one of the company owners we interviewed years ago. We were always on about how somebody creates an outlier business, a business where a lot of people can do something and they get 2 or 3 partners or employees, and that's where it is. And this individual started with a couple, and he went to 2,000 employees, IT services business. And I asked him, it was the title of the book, how did you do it? How? And he said, you have to stay at the center. And what he meant was that in the midst of all this chaos, even good chaos of growth, there had to be a core of himself that was completely grounded. And for me, part of the answer that was that for years I've meditated. And there has to be a point to remove yourself from the noise of the world. That if you can grant yourself a few minutes a day to notice your breathing, which is really all meditation needs to be. You don't need any fancy books or anything. It just starts from noticing your breathing. That you can get better at it when you practice. And what tends to happen for people, not that they're seeking some objective out of this, but it tends to be that this centering and grounding activity magically produces answers to troubling questions. If you can give yourself that pause, there's this phrase, the still small voice. And I'm just a believer that for all of us, there is a purpose, there is a soul, there is something that drives us, and it is different for each one of us. And you do come, hopefully, to understand that over time and to become more confident that the quirky or more individual or unique you are, it's totally fine. So in your case, you're right that for an individual joining an organization, if it's a good organization, it has a culture. It has values that they stand for and that they make sense and that team is embraced. And for the people joining, there has to be some congruence there. If there is not, if you have some individual who is so off on their own, well, that's the person who needs to stay a freelancer, if there truly is no fit. But I think what happens over time, at least for people in organizations they're helping grow or that they join, is they find this congruence. Doesn't necessarily have to be perfect match, but that they come to honor and be inspired by the values that are around them.
I think that's a terrific answer. I'm not even going to add to it. I think, thank you for that. Thank you very much for that. Can we talk about decision-making and building momentum for a minute? So this podcast is called the Winning Momentum podcast. And the reason for that is that it's always been a overly philosophical question in my mind about when I'm working with troubled companies is, when is a turnaround over? Who gets to say that? when are you not troubled anymore? Right? Because it's a whole different pitch to a different set of stakeholders. And so is it when you're not losing money anymore? Is it when you've hit break even? Is it when you've hit a certain EBITDA margin that's acceptable within your industry? When are you not troubled anymore? And the answer that I arrived at is when you have positive rather than negative momentum, rather than negative momentum. Okay. So what is positive momentum? Winning momentum to me, as I tell all the employees that I have to talk about this with, is when you wake up in the morning and you just feel like today is going to be a little bit better than yesterday. That's simple, right? And negative momentum is you wake up and you just think, oh boy, like today's going to suck as much or even more than yesterday did. And if you have positive winning momentum, it attracts resources. It attracts capital resources and it attracts human resources because people want to be associated and excited to be on an upward journey. So you can be losing money. You can be short on cash. I mean, every entrepreneurial venture is losing money in the beginning and short on cash in the beginning. Yet it's exciting to be associated with. And it's the same with turnarounds. Every negative momentum company, the sink is shipping. The ship is sinking, sorry. And you don't want to be associated with that. You don't want to be on that ship when it's going down. You want to jump off. Lenders want their money back. You have a terrible situation. So that's the whole idea of winning momentum. And the Winning Momentum podcast is, to me, it all boils down to what direction you're heading. And you, in some of your content, have talked about the idea that you should just wake up every morning and make a better decision. And that over time, you're just going to dominate your industry if you just improve and make a better decision every day. Can you talk about that for us?
Yes, I would say that is within a context of the fact that come to grips with maybe about half of all your decisions are not going to be the right ones. And that you're simply going to make a new decision. A lot of people get frozen because of what they think the magnitude of the decision is. Most decisions, and I'm talking about in business here, are not the ones that will destroy the company. And so the point is, make the decision. I have two daughters, and if you have kids, as they're growing up, they can hesitate and they're not sure what to do. And what I was always big with them on is, it's okay. Understand that a lot of the decisions you're making, do you want chocolate ice cream or vanilla ice cream? If it's the wrong decision, it's the wrong decision, but you're just going to make a new decision after that. The thing in business,
right?
As when you lead something, I think, is, can you distinguish between the very few decisions that are game changers and the vast majority of your decisions that could be wrong or right, but you're not betting everything on it. If it's right, great, you'll make another decision after that. If it's wrong, great, you'll make another decision after that. And it's just, be very clear on the distinction. If, for example, you own a company, it is, is this decision betting the company here or not? Now, within that, there's gradations. So for example, working with managers, especially people who are up and coming in their careers, I've gotten to the point of spelling it out. If someone is frozen, to say, okay, look, we're going to say you now have authority up to, say, $5,000 or $10,000 mistakes. Those are decisions, but we're going to just put it in the worst possible form of what could possibly go wrong here, is that this is that limit. And so if you're facing a budgeting decision and it is, say, $5,000, make it. And if you're wrong, and we're all going to understand, because this is what we've agreed to.
That's really interesting. I might actually try that in my businesses. I've never heard that before. Huh. Think about that one for a second. So the idea of this making better decisions every day, I think it starts off with, as you've pointed out in your writing, with just making a decision and understanding that you're always making a decision based on imperfect information. And you've quantified that, right? At, I think 80% is what you said. And I had suggested 70%. I think 80% was the Ray Dalio number as well in the last 6-9 months of his content. But the idea is, we always say in my world, the only bad decision is no decision.
Totally agree.
Right.
And for so many decisions, you just don't, if you're going for perfect, God help you, because it just means nothing is ever going to get done. And it's just not true for most things in which we're engaged. I mean, if you're working in the ER, got it. You need to be rigorously trained because it's life or death. For most decisions in business, it's just not that way. If you're working in social media, you're working in marketing, well, maybe the page design works or not, but you can test it out. But no one's going to die as a result of your decision. So just make the decision, because that's what is required of an effective leader. Leading means
A/B testing everything, right?
Yes.
It's just A/B testing everything. You make a decision, test to see if it works. If it doesn't work, try something else.
I think a lot of great leaders, what distinguishes them is to view what they are doing almost as if you were a scientist, and it's an experiment. It's not
Exactly.
you, it is removed from you. And if the experiment fails, well, that's interesting. Try a new experiment. The problem, I think, for a lot of people is they think what they do is who they are. And so if the project or this little experiment, if it fails, oh my God, I'm a bad person. I'm a bad person, and that's just the way that it is. That's not productive thinking. Not going to help you.
No, and they become paralyzed by negative thinking and the related fear that comes from that.
Yeah, and part of, unfortunately, what's fueling this now is that we can all go look on Instagram, we can go on TikTok, we can go on Facebook, and we can see everybody else is just having a perfect life. And it's a perfect photo, and they're on the perfect vacation. We all know this is completely made up, but it's just in our human nature, this sense of comparison, which then can become freezing. And there's got to come a point where you can embrace yourself with this idea, I am enough. I'm enough. I don't have to go get the PhD to be enough. I don't have to have traveled on this vacation to finally be complete. And in your work, you're equipped. You are there. Doesn't mean you're perfect. You're going to make mistakes, but if you advance, that's the whole point.
Love it. Love it. Bob, as we head to the top of the hour here, we ask each guest their 3 tips, their 3 strategies for changing momentum. Things are going not good in your career, your business, your personal life. How does Bob get things on the right track?
Well, we've had a wonderful conversation, Scott. You and I have been contrarians to each other for a little bit, so I want to give you an answer. I want to give you at least a first answer that maybe nobody else has said. All right? My first answer is give up. Anybody else said that one?
No one has said that. Explain more, because I actually I have some content that is titled "Give Up." So I think I'm going to be 100% with you.
Well, one of the things that I would say in terms of changing momentum, I'll say this is my second one, but I'll explain with the first. Join a mastermind group. Mastermind groups have been around for a while. An author named Napoleon Hill, Think and Grow Rich, 100 years ago, wrote about them. He said it was the reason for success. One of the reasons for success, Thomas Edison, Henry Ford, is they formed a bond as almost like a board of directors for each other that formed a super consciousness. And so there are mastermind groups all over, and I've benefited. I've been in a mastermind group with some folks for many years. And there's an organization where a guy named Jack Boland popularized the idea of the mastermind with steps that I think were probably derived from the 12-step program, Alcoholics Anonymous originally. But if you read the mastermind steps, these 8 steps, the first one is I surrender. And the point of it is I don't have all of the answers. And it's interesting in a mindset. It is not the same thing as giving up. It is not the same thing saying I'm taking my ball and going home. That's not what it is. There's something psychologically interesting that comes from the point of what is going to lead to help for you. Because none of us, there's this expression, alone you do it, but you don't do it alone. And this idea that through surrender, you're going to get to a solution. Just stop the fight for a minute. So I say give up. The second thing I would say is a mastermind group is key. And the third one, I want to hammer it home. I would suggest to anybody who's listening to this today, just grant yourself 90 seconds of silence and quiet, put the technology away, and just focus on your breathing and see what happens at the end of the 90 seconds.
Those are, okay, that is the best 3 answers I've had. I'm going to give you kudos on that. So thank you very much. Tell us about the new book. How do people find it? What should they do? Give us a little pitch on that, please.
Oh, thank you. The book, Right Leader, Right Time, it's, as they say, available where books are sold. You're not supposed to just say it's on Amazon because, of course, there still are Barnes & Noble and Target and other places where books sell. And the audio version has a lot of bonus material. It's on Audible for that version. We're also launching a free leadership assessment based on this 4 styles of leadership model. Fixer, Artist, Builder, Strategist, FABS, and the FABS Leadership Assessment is launching at rightleader.com.
Well, that just leads me into my next comment and question for the listeners. I have spent some time surfing through Bob's materials and websites, and it's just an endless, terrific advice for everything in business, for leadership, and even for your personal life. So I would urge you to go check out his content. And Bob, how do people reach you, and why should they reach you?
I can be reached at InterimExecs.com. And the reason they should reach me is I'd love to hear about your own leadership journey. I'm fascinated by everybody's stories, where they come from and where they're going. So absolutely feel free to get in touch.
Anything else before we sign off?
Scott, you're it, man. You're an inspiration. I'm really grateful to be on with you.
Thank you so much. And thank you, everybody, for listening. This has been the Winning Momentum podcast with Robert Jordan. And hit subscribe, give us a like, and more importantly, ask some questions, whatever you might want us to answer for you. We'll take a crack at that. Thanks for listening, everybody. We're done.
It's a wrap?
It's a wrap.
Scott, you're a hoot. 2 things. One of these days, we got to meet in person. And even more than that, maybe there's a shot to work together. You never know.
Love it. I hope you had some fun. I thought the content was amazing. So
that was great. Thank you. Did I, last time we talked, did I get your address?
No, I don't have any contact information for you at all. I had Ashley trying to track you down this morning. And so And I
Well,
called
the
your.
PR, yeah, the PR firm gets in the middle, but do you mind giving
Yeah.
me your physical address?
I don't know the physical address for the office. Or do you want a house address? Is that what you mean? Or
Yeah, I'm going to send you.
oh, okay.
We,
1810.
well, we did. We had a book launch party,
Oh, nice.
and we did. I'm going to send you a fixer mug.
Okay, I love it. 1810
1810
McLeod, MCLEOD Avenue, Fernie, FERNIE, British Columbia. Postal code is V, so Victoria 0B Bob, VOB 1 Mary 1.
Okay, 1810 McLeod Avenue, MCLEOD, right?
Yep.
Fernie, British Columbia, V0B1M1.
Correct. Do
Okay.
QR codes work over cameras? Claire.
Why? What is?
Well, it's just all my contact information.
Oh.
Anyways, I got somebody was in contact with Ashley. If you could just send an email or phone number or something, that would be great.
Yeah, I'll send my information. And we got a T-shirt for you. What size T-shirt do you wear?
Large.
All right, you're getting a little care package from us.
I love it. Thank you so much. It's been a blast.
Thank you, Scott. It's been a pleasure. I really appreciate it.